Hey everyone, I'm Tim, and welcome back to Can't Be True, the channel that peels back the curtain on the strange, the forgotten, and the downright unbelievable. You've heard the names, you've seen the movies, you've probably even studied them in school. But what if I told you that some of the most iconic people in history might never have existed at all? Today we're diving into the murky waters between myth and reality, where fact blurs into legend. From war generals and poets to noble outlaws and ancient warriors, these 6 historical figures are household names. But dig a little deeper and the evidence starts to fall apart. So hit that like button, subscribe if you're into the weird and mysterious, and let's jump into 6 famous people who might have never existed. Number 1. Homer. The name alone conjures up epic battles, wrathful gods, and journeys across the wine-dark sea. The Iliad and the Odyssey are 2 of the most influential works in Western literature, and they're both credited to this one blind poet from ancient Greece. But here's the kicker. We don't actually know if Homer ever existed. No birth record, no death record, no ancient selfies etched in marble. Just a name passed down and through generations of storytellers. The earliest references to Homer appear centuries after he supposedly lived, and those references? They wildly contradict each other. Some say he was from Smyrna, others from Chios. Some say he was blind, others say he was a bard, or even a woman. But the biggest red flag: scholars believe the Iliad and Odyssey were developed over hundreds of years through oral tradition, meaning they were told and retold by many voices before ever being written down. It's entirely possible that Homer was a symbolic figurehead, a brand name slapped onto these stories to give them credibility. In fact, in academic circles, the Homeric question is an actual thing. Whole university departments have spent decades debating whether Homer was one man, a group of poets, or just a convenient fiction. And here's something even wilder. Different ancient cultures had their own versions of Homer's epics, sometimes with regional details and altered morals. That suggests the tales weren't locked down by one author, but instead evolved like folklore passed around a campfire. If he didn't exist, that means 2 of the oldest and most beloved books in human history were created by a crowd of anonymous authors whose names we'll never know. So is Homer a real person, or just the world's oldest ghostwriter? Number 2. King Arthur, Camelot, the Round Table, Excalibur, Merlin. These aren't just pieces of British folklore. They're central to the myth of King Arthur, the once and future king. But historians have spent centuries trying to answer one simple question. Was Arthur ever real? The first mention of Arthur doesn't appear until the 9th century, long after he supposedly lived in the 5th or 6th century. And even that mention is brief, vague, and filled with magic and miracles. There's no contemporary evidence, no coin with his face, no castle foundation bearing his name, just poems, legends, and manuscripts written by monks and storytellers, centuries after the fact. Some believe Arthur was based on a real military leader, a Roman British commander who led resistance against Saxon invaders. Others argue he's a mashup of several warlords from the time, rolled into one mythical figure, and it doesn't help that the stories evolve wildly over time. Early texts portray him as a rough warrior, later tales give him chivalry, dragons, and the Holy Grail. Even the famous sword in the stone wasn't part of the original lore, it was added centuries later to make Arthur's story more magical. During the Middle Ages, Arthur's tale exploded in popularity as monarchs used him to promote their divine right to rule. In the Victorian era, the legend was sanitized for literature and children's stories, losing the grit of earlier versions. The more you trace King Arthur's legend back through time, the more he seems like a literary invention, a symbol of ideal kingship in a time when Britain was struggling for identity. So was he a flesh and blood ruler, or just the poster child for medieval fanfiction? Number 3. Mulan. Thanks to Disney, we all know the story of Mulan, a young woman who disguises herself as a man to join the army and protect her father. But long before the musical numbers and Mushu the dragon, Mulan existed in Chinese folklore, and her reality is just as questionable. The earliest version of her story appears in a 6th century ballad called The Ballad of Mulan. It's beautifully written, but it's also anonymous, with no mention of where or when she supposedly lived. Historians have never found military records of a woman named Mulan. No birth certificate, no grave, no official recognition, just poems and plays that reappear across centuries, each version more dramatized than the last. Some scholars believe Mulan may have been inspired by multiple real women warriors whose stories were fused into one archetype. Others think she was purely fictional, a folk hero created to represent Confucian values like loyalty, sacrifice, and filial piety. Interestingly, later dynasties used Mulan's tale as propaganda to reinforce gender roles. Even though she's brave and rebellious, she always returns home to fulfill her duties as a daughter, making her a palatable heroine in patriarchal society. There are even competing theories about her ethnicity. Some believe she was Han Chinese, others say it's Xianbei, a nomadic group from the north. Each retelling of her legend tweaks her backstory to match the political mood of the time. More recently, historians have pointed out how Mulan's story served different political movements, from nationalist pride during the Qing dynasty to female empowerment in the 20th century. The story changes to fit the needs of whoever's telling it, so while Mulan's legacy is iconic, she may have only ever existed on paper. Number 4. Robin Hood. Steal from the rich, give to the poor. Fight injustice with a bow and arrow in Sherwood Forest. The legend of Robin Hood is practically superhero status in England, but was he ever real? The earliest ballads about Robin Hood pop up in the 14th century. He's described as an outlaw, a yeoman, a nobleman, even a knight. His origin story shifts depending on who's telling it. The weird part? There were dozens of Robins in medieval England. Robin was a common nickname for criminals, and Hood simply meant a disguise or a literal hood, so the name might have been a placeholder rather than a person. Historians have searched royal records, court cases, and tax rolls. Some point to a man named Robert Hood in Yorkshire. Others think he's an amalgamation of various bandits whose deeds were exaggerated over time. The idea of Robin Hood as a freedom fighter for the people? That came much later, probably to reflect growing resentment against corrupt nobility. He became less of a thief and more of a noble outlaw as the political winds changed. Even Maid Marian, Friar Tuck, and Little John weren't part of the original tales. They were added over the centuries to deepen the mythos. Interestingly, Robin Hood's stories were sometimes used to make political points, like protesting rising taxes or critiquing monarchy. In other words, he wasn't just folklore. He was rebellion in rhyme. In truth, Robin Hood's identity is so diluted and contradictory that most scholars agree, if he existed at all, we'll never know which parts are real and which were added for dramatic effect. He might have been real, he might have been 1,000 outlaws, or he might have been a legend invented to give people hope. Number 5. William Tell. You know the story, a crossbow, an apple, a tyrant's dare, and a clean shot that echoes through Swiss legend. William Tell is hailed as a symbol of rebellion and independence in Switzerland. But here's the twist. There's no hard evidence he ever existed. The earliest written account of Tell's story didn't appear until nearly 200 years after he supposedly lived. That version came from a chronicle written by Aegidius Tschudi in the 1500s, and it's full of romanticized patriotism rather than factual reporting. Historians believe the Tell legend might have been inspired by similar stories from other cultures, like the Danish saga of Palnatoke, who also had to shoot an apple off his son's head. The tale might have traveled and morphed into the uniquely Swiss version we know today. Even Swiss historians have raised eyebrows over the accuracy. In 1760, a public debate erupted when Enlightenment scholars questioned whether Tell ever lived at all. The debate got so heated that the Swiss government eventually banned books that denied his existence. Still, there's no record of a man named William Tell in 14th century Swiss documents, no land deeds, no court transcripts, no records from the town of Altdorf, where the infamous apple shot supposedly happened. So why did his legend become so important? Because it arrived right when Switzerland was crafting its national identity. Tell became a convenient folk hero, someone who stood for liberty, courage, and resistance against tyranny. The legend was later immortalized in operas, plays, and even currency. Whether it's tourism or patriotism, the myth endures because people want a hero who aims true. Whether or not he was real, William Tell became a foundational myth, a national rallying cry. But when you strip away the crossbow and the apple, you're left with a big question mark. Number 6. Sun Tzu. Know your enemy. All warfare is based on deception. These are the kinds of quotes that earned Sun Tzu, author of The Art of War, legendary status as one of the greatest military minds in history. But historians have been quietly wondering for centuries. Did he ever actually exist? The book is said to have been written around the 5th century BCE, during China's spring and autumn period. But the first reliable records of the art of war don't appear until hundreds of years later, well into the Han Dynasty. There's no mention of Sun Tzu in contemporary military logs, government documents, or war records, just vague references and stories that sound more like fables than facts. Some scholars believe that the art of war was written by multiple strategists, not one person. Others think Sun Tzu was a title, not a name. Zhu just means master, and Sun may refer to a school or a philosophy. If that's the case, the book could have been a compilation of strategies developed by a whole tradition of thinkers over time. In fact, certain sections of the book contradict each other, suggesting different authors with different viewpoints. That's a red flag if you're trying to argue for a single unified author. The mystery gets deeper when you look at the style of writing. Linguists have noted that the art of war uses phrases and idioms that wouldn't have existed in the 5th century BCE. That suggests later edits, or that the entire text was written long after Sun Tzu supposedly lived. Interestingly, later dynasties used the art of war as a tool for political maneuvering. Emperors cited it, generals memorized it, and even modern military academies still teach it, regardless of whether its author ever lived. So was he a brilliant general? A mythical strategist? Or just a clever pen name used by a school of thought that wanted to influence military theory for generations? So there you have it. 6 historical icons who might never have existed at all. From poets and warriors to rebels and kings, their stories have shaped cultures, inspired books and movies, and even helped define national identities. Victors, then myth is written by the believers, and sometimes belief is all it takes to keep a legend alive. Thanks for watching Can't Be True. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Which of these figures do you think was real? And which do you think was pure fiction? Or is there someone else you suspect never actually walked this earth? Be sure to let me know in the comments. Until next time, keep questioning everything and stay curious.